Today I'm joined with the Honorary Senator John Duniam, who has been representing Tasmania in Parliament since 2016. You've worked on important areas like forestry, fisheries, and regional tourism, and you're really passionate about standing up for Tasmanians and making sure their voices are heard in Parliament. You recently contributed to an article, I believe, that was featured in last week's edition of The Advertiser that was talking about what's happening to kids in the classroom when they're being overexposed to the effects of climate change and what it's doing to the earth when they aren't necessarily fully developed to process the information yet. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here, and it's an important issue.
I was wondering if I can recite a poem to you now. Um, if I just grab this. Have you seen the latest news? Anxiety is the common view. We feel the looming weight with depression knocking at the gate. Look around, what can you see? Born in love and abundance of creativity. When we were young, we feared not all was wrong, creating freely, believing we belong. As we grow older, we begin to fear. We put up barriers, wanting to disappear. Comparing our success and skill when once I'd painted with an innocent thrill. Our world now moves so fast around us, alphas and Gen Zs, as we are consumed by technology and our identities. We are told what is wrong, what is right to say. Fear of offence looms over me every day. Climate, generational inequality, futures fret. Don't forget the student debt. I wish we didn't feel so low. We have to push past the fear that hides our natural flow. Hardships faced in times before, wars and Great Depression, yet they fought more. My great-grandpa survived a concentration camp. His spirit kept him going, burning lead. We saw how they rose, so can we. Hope is not dead and never will be. We have everything we need inside. In everyone's heart, there is a passion waiting for us to find. We are ready to take on the world. Let our wings grow and unfurl. No politics or technological intervention will ever destroy us. No objection. Fear overcome with inspiration, we can rise together. The ultimate unification. For as dormant as it may lie within every one of us, let us be inspired by those around us who love what they do with no malice, creating an immunity from the poison chalice. That's
Excellent.
the end of it. I thought when we were preparing for this chat, I thought there's actually some lines in there, especially about the climate that are being instilled into the primary school curriculum. And I was recently reading your article. It was saying that 9-year-olds have a section in the curriculum which teaches them that climate change is threatening humankind and pushing people into poverty. Could you share your thoughts on this approach to climate education in young children?
I sure can, Isabella, and I just want to commend you for what you do. I think it's great to have this interaction and be able to have conversations with people that are concerned and thinking about these things much earlier in life. Having said that, though, I am concerned about the way we're approaching engaging young people on these issues in schools. And just last week, I went to my youngest son's, he's 10 years old, he goes to a school here in Hobart, to a student-led conference where they take the parents through the work that they're working on at the moment. And the first thing that I saw that he was working on was this draft letter to the editor. And it was all about how evil fossil fuels were. And there was this sort of binary approach in the letter that the use of fossil fuels is turbocharging climate change and therefore will destroy the planet. And we must immediately stop using fossil fuels and switch to renewables today, or else the planet will die. And so here's my 10-year-old son, and we're a relatively political household. I'm a politician. I've been engaged in public debate now for the better part of a decade publicly, and we talk about these things. We always have the news running in the house, and so there's debate about these things. But he, despite that, was part of this, part of the curriculum where they're learning about how use of fossil fuels, the things that power our cars, our buses, our trucks, our planes, that are used in lots of industrial processes to manufacture the things we need here. And it's all demonized. And so when these kids go into school, there's a few things that come out of this, but they're faced with this. And teachers and the things that students are given are all trusted. As a young person, you look to the education system and the teachers within it, and they're trusted entities, they're trusted individuals. You believe what they say. And so if a student is presented with this information and it is matter of fact, it is gospel law, then you're going to believe it. So therefore, these kids are coming out of school believing that fossil fuels there is no good that comes of them. They are just a cheap and easy way to make money and to pillage the planet. And that not only sets them up for failure when it comes to learning about the realities of the world as it is once you leave school, but also creates that stress and anxiety. And one other example, without going on for too long here, I mean, a couple of years ago at the same school, my youngest son, again, we were watching one of his older brothers play soccer at the school, and there was a tree stump at the edge of the sort of playing area beside the field, and he got quite upset because in class just a little earlier that year, they'd been learning about deforestation. And deforestation is bad because it kills the koalas. We don't have koalas here in Tasmania, yet the teacher was telling him that we do. Deforestation doesn't occur in Australia. For every tree that's cut down, we plant another 10 because you need it to build bookshelves and desks and framing for houses. I mean, that's how these things work. And so I was able to correct his misunderstanding there, but this is what the education system is doing. And I'm alarmed at the misinformation that kids are leaving schools with and going out into the real world with.
Obviously, school is a compulsory activity that children participate in. Does it scare you not only as a politician, but as a father to see your kids being fed almost always with what you've just said, false information about what's going on in the world around them, especially when their brains aren't fully developed to process the information in a way that won't leave them with equal anxiety and stress that just isn't necessary to inflict on them?
Your poem touched on the innocence of childhood and I think the right to be able to grow with a degree of freedom and not be burdened by some of the things we do have to confront as a society. In the same way, we have to monitor what kids look at online because there's a whole lot of insidious stuff out there. We should be looking at what they're provided with by way of information. And it is a phenomenon, this anxiety, that an actual psychological phenomenon documented by professionals. The burden borne by children as a result of what they're being taught here is something that is very alarming. And as a father, I'm concerned. As the shadow education minister federally, I'm concerned by that. Now, I'm not one to turn a blind eye to the need to minimise human impact on the environment. We need to do better, and we can. Every single day there are new inventions, new ways of doing things, new ways of getting the same productive outcome, like generating electricity, by causing less of an impact on the environment. Renewables are one way of doing that. More efficient generation technologies when it comes to coal or gas, for example. But, and no one's denying we should not teach that to our kids, but this alarmist and approach that schools take in the curriculum, I think, is very concerning. And so we do need to address that, or else we are going to have kids that are going out into the world thinking that they've not got long to live or the planet hasn't got long to last, because that is not a view I subscribe to. I'm not a climate denier. I'm not a believer that we should just go back to the ways of the early 1900s, because that didn't work either. But we've got to get the balance right and teach our kids very important truths and basics so they are equipped to be better custodians of the world than we are.
Certainly think we, especially the younger generation, are forgetting that we don't have to just pick an extreme of how we tackle the present environmental issue. We can do partially coal and gas, but also combine that with renewables so that while we still can get efficient energy production, we can also be making sure we're minimising the impact while by combining that. What can you do in your role as Shadow Education Minister to kind of clear out this misinformation in the classroom and what kids are being taught?
Yeah, I think that the curriculum should be around a very central, basic, and important tenet, and that is ensuring that at the end of their education, whatever level a student wishes to go to, whether that's year 12, onto university, onto postgraduate education like an honours thesis or a doctorate, whatever it might be, our education system from childcare, early learning, all the way through to tertiary education should be focused on making sure that our students are amongst the world's best. And that means that we have the best teachers teaching the best leading in the best leading edge ways students about the things they need to know. Now, yes, managing our environment, understanding the pressure that the world is under from a growing population is important. But when our kids' heads are completely full and concerned with the future of the planet because human existence challenges our planet's existence, then they're not going to be worrying about maths. They're not going to be worrying about language studies or history or other scientific studies. That's what concerns me. So it is about getting things recalibrated and back on track. I think the approach to education sometimes becomes overcomplicated. I'm not an educational professional, but when you go and look at the standards our country attains as opposed to other countries, there is work to do. And I think we need to be focusing on how we get better maths, English and other studies, historical, scientific studies, better rankings globally. That's where our focus should be, rather than stressing our kids out about whether they're going to have a planet to live on in 30 or 40 years' time.
Yes, and while it is important to inform them about things about climate change, I think it should be more important that primary school students are learning about things like recycling and what they can do to reduce their carbon footprint in a positive way that is giving them a sense of hope that they can make a difference as the next generation, rather than thinking that they're not going to have an adulthood.
Yeah, it's spot on, Isabella. I mean, that's exactly right. Like things like that, waste management, but also understanding, as you said before, the importance of some of the things that are currently demonised. I mean, their parents drop them to schools in a car, and those cars run, generally speaking, for the most part, on fuel. And that's one of those evil things that currently kids, at least in the experience of my youngest son, are being taught should be phased out immediately. Having a reality around some of this stuff, I think, is incredibly important. And that's, it's personal responsibility, making sure we make choices that minimise the impact on the environment. And we're seeing that over the course of time, those practical individual things you can do. But scaring kids into believing that the world as you see it today, the world your parents grew up in, is not going to be the world you have, I think is very unfair. And look, I remember in 1992, it might have been, I think, when I was in grade 5, my teacher, who was probably one of the worst teachers I've ever come across, if I can be honest about it, was telling me that the world was going to end. We've all had them. That the world was going to end, and it was all about the hole in the ozone layer and how we were all going to be burnt to a crisp because of a pulp mill in Burnie, which is a town in the north of Tasmania. I mean, that was the sort of alarmist teaching I had back then, but here I am at the ripe old age of 42. The planet has not burnt to a crisp. I live in a beautiful state and it's as green and lush as it's ever been. And that alarmism from more than 30 plus years ago was not real. So why do it to kids? It's not okay.
You would obviously be aware of the shocking statistics that teenagers and children are the most anxious or depressed ever seen in history. Do you think that by removing some of this climate anxiety from the classroom, that we would see a reduction in the level of mental health issues regarding fear of the world ending in children?
Well, I think it would inevitably contribute to a reduction in anxiety if you know that the people who are managing the world today actually do care about the planet, contrary to the views of some. Yeah, I want for my kids Australia, the world, to be a healthy, thriving and sustainable place as much as the next person. There are some political opponents who will say, no, that's not what they want. They want to destroy the planet and take all the profits, and no one wants that. That's ridiculous thinking. So, yes, it would reduce that anxiety. I mean, there's a range of things I think we could be doing to reduce anxiety, and I think social media has a lot to answer for. And as parents, that's something we need to monitor and manage in our own households. It's not for the government to manage, I don't think. But yeah, it definitely would alter the levels of anxiety out there in young people's lives. Look, you're young once. When you turn 18 and you have to vote, you get a job and pay tax, and you're responsible for yourself and raising your family if you have one, you're going to have enough stress in your life then. I can say that as someone who is living that adult life now. Enjoy your youth. The world is still going to be here when you're an adult. It is not going to evaporate or burn, as some people are saying. So, yes, let's remove that anxiety and allow kids to be kids.
I think it's really valuable what you just touched on before about social media, because school's a compulsory thing. And if children are being constantly fed in the classroom all this doom and gloom about how the world's going to end, then they get home and they go on their phones and they start scrolling on social media and they come across more of this content. And as their brains are not fully developed, they're not really being able to distinguish whether it's true or false what they are reading. So really, and it could be coming from home as well, they can see things on the TV. Kids today are surrounded by constant doom of gloom. And as you said, we have to savor our childhood. We have tax and voting and all this kind of stuff to worry about when we're older. What tips would you give to parents when trying to limit the amount of stress that children are exposed to in terms of this?
Well, I think if your kids have devices, as invariably they do over time, I mean, it's a necessary evil, I think. I've got three boys, and my oldest is 16, and so he's learning to drive. He's at that end, and, he's mobile, he's with mates. We need to know where he is. We need to work with them on that sort of thing, so that the devices on which they consume social media is, a necessary evil, as I say. There are ways of managing content, having and what they access on their mobile devices. I think having open conversations about what they can and can't view, having rules in the house, particularly around when they're able to be on their devices and not. And there are some great apps that parents can download to manage that, which I've come across as well. Sometimes, though, I mean, if like, again, my kids will go into the lounge room and turn on the TV and it'll be YouTube shorts. And thankfully, we haven't had too much politically loaded stuff or this climate alarmism stuff coming into the house. But it's amazing what my kids will parrot back to me that they've heard on TV. And as you say, they're not able to discern between fact and fiction, truth and falsehood. And so this stuff gets absorbed. And if you see it on TV or you see it on YouTube, it must be real. And that's a worry. And so to that end, parents do need to take responsibility for that. The government can't, and the government never should. And I think this is where parents have a role, and every parent should be responsible for how their kids operate online. That's how it used to be in the olden days. You were responsible for how your kids were being brought up. It's no different today. Online is just another playground. You're responsible for how your kids are interacting and engaging there as well.
That's so true. What do you believe the motivations are behind introducing such anxiety-inducing material in the young children's curriculum, potentially creating unnecessary levels of fear and hysteria?
Look, I think at the base of anything like this sort of thing is a well-meaning group of people or an individual. People who are worried. There are people out there who are rightly worried about the planet's future. If people weren't worried about the planet's future, we'd never improve how we live and how we manufacture things, how we design cars to be lower when it comes to emissions, etc. Those sorts of technological improvements don't occur without some level of concern. But there are people out there who will hijack a good cause and turn it into something else for purposes that are not so good. And often politics is where a lot of that happens. And there are people in politics who seek to cause fear, create division around issues. And if you're, for example, fearing that the planet is about to go up in flames because of climate change, well, then you go out and look for the political party that has an answer to that problem. And I'll say it, the Australian Greens, who are not they're political opponents of mine, will say, well, we are in a climate crisis. We are facing global boiling, is a new term they're using. And so to that end, if you're worried about the planet going up in flames because at school you were taught that's what's going to happen, you're going to vote green. And so there is a political motivation for this sort of thing, and it has found its way into academic and educational institutions. It's found its way into government. It's found its way into the media. And it is something that we just need to take a deep breath on. The world, there are statistics out there that counter some of the oft bandied about claims around changes to the environment. As I said before, I'm not a climate denier. 10 or 12,000 years ago, the world was frozen. Or parts of the world. Like, we've been through an ice age. The planet has changed. It has warmed, and it is now sustaining life. Yes, the climate will continue to change, but how we respond to that needs to be balanced and responsible. Because if we phase out all of the things that we are told are causing climate change here in Australia, we wouldn't have a functioning economy. Correct.
Do you think that the current government are responsibly managing what children are being fed in the classroom and how we're dealing with the overall climate crisis?
Look, I don't believe they are. I think, again, the curriculum, which is a product of the current government, doesn't deal with the foundational elements of education enough. And there's too much of what we've been talking about in there. When you've got kids at a very young age being taught about catastrophic events that may or may not happen, chances are won't happen because of things like climate change, as opposed to how to add up, how to subtract, how to read and write, how to analyse a document, how to study history in later years in high school, for example, then we're in more trouble than we know. And you only have to go to end-of-year assemblies. In my job, I go to a lot of them. And I'll never forget, there was a Catholic school here in Hobart, and one of their end-of-year groups did a performance, and it was called Dear Earth, We're Sorry. And it was all about how we as human beings had been destroying the planet. Driving cars and having factories and everyone having iPhones and wearing the clothes they want was bad for the planet. And it was just this binary, human existence is not compatible with a sustainable environment. That is not right. The planet is very resilient. You only have to go to parts of Western Tasmania where we've had some of the most heavily industrialised, environmentally destructive mining practices over the last century and a half. But the rainforest is taking back over the environment that was once destroyed by mining. It is a sustainable planet. Doesn't mean we can go about doing what we want. We should be responsible. But to teach kids that we are bad for the planet and the way we live is bad for the planet has no place in schools, in my view.
No, that is very valuable what you've shared today with us, and we really appreciate you chatting with us about that. I'm sure all the listeners currently listening will find this very valuable.
Isabella, thanks for having me, and we'll catch up again soon.